Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here now for the 88th time to urge this body to wake up to the looming threat of climate change. In the last few weeks, my Republican colleagues have talked about climate change here on the floor more than at any other time since I began giving these weekly speeches. We'd heard next to nothing from Republicans about climate change since the 2010 Citizens United decision. That decision let loose the fossil fuel industry to cast an even darker shadow of intimidation across this town. So, this minor outbreak of dialogue, although minor, has been significant. All but one of my Republican colleagues are now on the record saying they agree that climate change is real, and 15 voted that it's caused, at least in part, by humans. That's some progress. Yet, some still persist in their denial. Our scientists now tell us that warming of the climate system is unequivocal. Yet we equivocate. Scientists are a careful bunch. When they say something is unequivocal, we ought to take note. The senior senator from Oklahoma, our chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee, however, maintains that human-caused climate change is a hoax. He thinks it is arrogant to say that humans could cause the climate to change. What's really arrogant, Mr. President, is thinking that we can ignore the laws of nature, the laws of physics, the laws of chemistry, the laws of biology. Whose laws do we think those are? Those laws were given to us by our Creator. They came with this world. They are immutable. These laws of nature dictate that carbon dioxide is the byproduct of our burning of fossil fuels. These laws of nature, fresh from the hands of our Creator, explain why that carbon traps heat in our atmosphere, something we have known since Abraham Lincoln was riding around this town in his top hat. And here in the Senate, we have no human power to amend or repeal those laws. And we shouldn't, here in this Senate, cherry pick from the scientific record. That's not fair play. Here on the floor, the EPW chairman paraphrased a 2013 paper from the journal Nature saying, quote, this is his quote, "There is considerable uncertainty as to whether increases in extreme climate variability is occurring." The author of the paper, Dr. Chris Huntingford of the UK's National Environmental Research Council, took exception to his paper being thus mischaracterized. He said this, "Our Nature paper strictly analyzes only year-to-year variability, fluctuations in temperature. We do not at any point offer evidence against a general, ongoing, background, and upwards warming trend. Detection and attribution statistical studies show that the observed average increasing temperatures are almost certainly a consequence of the burning of fossil fuels." End quote. In that same floor speech, my colleague from Oklahoma suggested that we could relax about climate change because the Munich Reinsurance Company said weather-related disaster losses have declined as a proportion of GDP worldwide. He neglected to mention testimony before our EPW committee last July by Munich Re's head of risk accumulation in the United States, Carl Hedde, to wit, and I'll quote him, "Due to our history of insuring natural catastrophe, Munich Re was one of the first companies in the industry to recognize the impact that weather-related events and a changing climate could have on its business model and customers." He went on to say that as a nation, we need to take steps to reduce the societal impact of weather events as we see greater variability and volatility in our climate. The senior senator from Oklahoma has even resurrected the ghost of ClimateGate, a faux scandal whipped up a few years ago by the polluters and their allies to suggest that climate scientists were colluding to exaggerate global warming data. Turned out, it was the cooked-up, phony scandal that was exaggerated and not the data. So-called ClimateGate should actually accurately be called ClimateGate-Gate. Yet, years later, this zombie falsehood still staggers about the floor of the Senate, attempting to cast doubt on human-caused climate change. The polluters have relentlessly made it their business to misconstrue the findings of scientific works and to cling to discredited accusations. We would do well to listen to the overwhelming majority of practicing, publishing climate scientists who agree that our carbon pollution is altering the climate. Scientists who conduct experiments, who examine data, who arrive at conclusions, who submit their work through peer review, and who make their data accessible for due diligence by other researchers. It's the best science out there. But I'm afraid that science doesn't have the ear of the senior senator from Oklahoma. He showed us who he listens to. He brought a chart here to the floor showing several dozen recognized scientists, as he called them, who don't buy the climate consensus. That chart was produced by an outfit called the Heartland Institute. You may remember them for associating climate scientists with the Unabomber, classy group. Well, their scientists, so-called, included bloggers, columnists, staff of conservative think tanks, a member of the European Parliament, and many scientists who have been funded by the fossil fuel industry. Mr. President, I'll side with the scientists affiliated with the American Association for the Advancement of Science over a bunch of carefully selected bloggers. I'll trust NASA and NOAA over scientists who shill for the fossil fuel industry. The Heartland Institute is not alone. It is part of a sophisticated network of climate denial propped up by the carbon-polluting fossil fuel industry. It's a front group, fueled by the special interests and their dubious experts. Interestingly, if you go to Oklahoma State University, you find one of the experts on this. Dr. Riley Dunlap at Oklahoma State could tell his senator all about it. Professor Dunlap is one of the preeminent researchers into the deliberate and coordinated effort by corporate interests to spread denial propaganda and to distort public opinion on climate change, what he calls the, quote, organized climate denial machine, end quote. Dunlap and a colleague found that nearly 90% of climate denial books coming out of publishing houses between 1982 and 2010, guess what, had ties to conservative fossil fuel-funded think tanks such as the Heartland Institute. The whole thing is a rigged game and a phony. And there's a very good professor at Oklahoma State University who keeps track of it. Mr. President, I also have here a fact sheet from the Oklahoma Climatological Survey, its statement on climate change and its implications for Oklahoma. Here's what it says in plain language. The Earth's climate has warmed during the last 100 years. The Earth's climate will continue to warm for the foreseeable future. And much of the global average temperature increases over the last 50 years can be attributed to human activities, particularly increasing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's actually a non-controversial statement among regular scientists. Mr. President, this is no radical with some political agenda. This is a fact sheet from a state scientific agency, happens to be Oklahoma's. And here's what the agency expects this means for Oklahoma. Earlier maturation of winter wheat and orchard crops, leaving them more vulnerable to late freeze events. Drought frequency and severity increases, especially during the summer. Drier and warmer conditions, increasing the risk of wildfires. Rain-free periods lengthening, with individual rainfall events becoming more intense, and more runoff and flash flooding. I ask unanimous consent to submit this for the record.
Without objection.
The National Climate Assessment estimates that by the end of the century, the temperatures in the southern Great Plains will increase up to 9 degrees. Mark Schaefer is a researcher at the Oklahoma Climatological Survey who contributed to the National Climate Assessment. He told the newspaper The Oklahoman that in a few decades, Oklahoma could see an entire month of 100-degree-plus temperatures every summer. By century's end, daily high temperatures could top 100 degrees for the entire summer. As the climate warms, droughts will probably get worse, both more severe and more frequent. 9 Oklahoma professors from Oral Roberts University, Southern Nazarene University, and the University of Tulsa were among 200 evangelical scientists and academics to sign a 2013 letter to Congress imploring us to address climate change. All of God's creation, says the letter, is groaning under the weight of our uncontrolled use of fossil fuels. The threat to future generations and global prosperity, it continues, means we can no longer afford the complacency and endless debate. We as a society risk being counted among those who destroy the earth. Those who know the Bible here will know that that reference to those who destroy the earth comes from Revelations. Mr. President, I'll quote from Revelations. "And thy wrath is come, and the time that thou shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth." The letter warns that the way we live harms our neighbors, threatening to create more empty wells, devastated cropland, lost villages, environmental refugees, and disease. I ask unanimous consent to enter that letter from the 200 evangelical Christian scientists into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Finally, Mr. President, at the University of Oklahoma, Berrien Moore III is Dean of the College of Atmosphere and Geographic Sciences, and he is also Director of the National Weather Center. Dean Moore of the University of Oklahoma was a lead author on an intergovernmental panel on climate change report, which the senator from Oklahoma is so fond of disparaging. Dr. Moore's work helped the IPCC earn the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. He has won research accolades from NOAA and from NASA. In 2009, Dr. Moore testified before the House Committee on Science and Technology. Here's what he had to say about climate change. "On the increasing strength of Earth science, we now can state that global warming is unequivocal." There's that word again. But this simply sets the challenge. We need now, this is 5 years ago, by the way, we need now to develop the capability to monitor and thereby manage greenhouse gas emissions through this century and beyond. The challenge is growing and will not go away. Mr. President, the effects of climate change are all too real today in Oklahoma, in Rhode Island, and across the nation. If you don't believe me, go to Oklahoma State and the University of Oklahoma and talk to the scientists I just mentioned. The outlook for us, if we fail to act, is increasingly dark. But look again at Oklahoma. The Sooner State is the 4th largest producer of wind power in the country. Wind turbines there make progress towards energy independence, and they give Oklahoma farmers steady income as a hedge against droughts and extreme weather. So you farm, and you get paid for having the wind turbine located on your farm. It is a win-win. Gary McManus, the Oklahoma State climatologist, has given a number of presentations on climate change and its likely effects on his home state. He often prefaces those talks with this admonition: this is the science. It's up for you to decide what you do with it. You can either ignore it or you can use it. Mr. President, in my view, there will be a high price in harm and in infamy to this democracy if we continue to ignore it. So I say, let's use it. But first, we'll have to wake up. Mr. President, I yield the floor.